Are you looking for a place to meet like-minded people? Perhaps you're a light worker looking for a safe place to share your thoughts and services. We've got a place for you, intuitalks.com. Join for free, post updates, blogs, create and join groups via website or radio or class package. The possibilities are endless. Join the all-spiritual, all-under-one-roof network, www.intuitalks.com.
Welcome, everybody, to Voices from the Past, and I'm Dorothy Holder, your hostess with the mostess. Today we're looking at the incorrectly named Enochian tablets, but because it's pretty much how they're best known, mainly due to more biblical-oriented individuals in more recent times. They are not related to Enoch, who was referenced in the Bible. In fact, there's no Enoch in them at all. And John Dee himself, who is one of the authors, I suppose, he is the author of the documents of the books, is in fact always referring to it in his own writings as the Angelica Codex or the Angelical books. However, we will look at that a little bit later. Right at the moment, I have had an interesting question by two separate individuals this week, so I thought I'd put it out there on air. I was asked about my poster, the Voices from the Past poster, and where I found the picture. All of my posters are developed by me, although there are pictures obviously in them. This one's composed of 9 pictures, not counting the text over the top. The candles came from an actual Buddha picture, and these 3 were a number of maybe 15 or more candles in the front row, which I extracted. There are the Dead Sea Scrolls within the picture. There is Chinese writing that dates back. They're all prominent writings, and of course, then we've got part of the Dead Sea Scrolls in there and an old statue. Now, that statue, that's the facial features right here, as opposed to the one that you can see, which is known as and deliberately chosen because he is called the Scribe. He sits in the Cairo Museum and was created around 2400 or 500 BC, and of course in Egypt. He is called the Scribe. He has the paper, what would be paper in the sculpture on his knee. He's only missing his pen or what he would have written with, and his necklace, which is thought to have been looted at some point. One of the oldest relics. So it pertains to the show, obviously, which is genuinely about documents that have been written in the past that influence us today, that have had an influence. And when you start looking through some of these amazing documents, some of these amazing people, I'm halfway through the series already. This is number 4 of only 8, and then I move on. After having a few weeks break, the sacred documents, insofar as that they have been integrated to certain elements of society, they've either influenced our biblical understandings, if you are biblical at all, or even if you're not, it's a document of merit of its own, with multiple authors. It's the only real problem with documents at all, sacred documents, is how they're presented to us, whether they're presented to us as a factual, rendition of what the creation was, what the intention was. If you don't know the context, if you don't know the intention of the author, the chances are pretty good you're going to misinterpret the message, and that's a powerful thing to take on board, to my mind, as many of these were written in ancient languages, which we lose a little bit of interpretation. We have words that change and evolve in meaning over time, and I've come across this repeatedly, that if you took the ancient, if you look at the etymology of a word and you go with the ancient origin of that particular word, a whole sentence can be quite different. The word heaven, for example, which is commonly accepted to mean some place you go to after death, originally meant, and deliberately, directly meant just sky. It didn't mean anything else. And this is what leads people to have these interesting ideas that maybe people came from the skies. Maybe there was something that came out of the skies. That's sort of leads us into those whole extraterrestrial arguments when it comes to our history. But today we're looking at the so-called Enochian tablets of Dr. Dee, and I think of it more as like a mysterious lost language of the angels, because that's what it was. That they channeled this message over a long period of time, Dr. D and Edward Kelley. Edward Kelley was the seer. He was the channel. Dr. John D was the recorder. Now, it's an alliance that is a powerful alliance between these two. It was the late 16th century, so we're getting in, that's the 1500s for those who forget that it's sort of a year ahead. Dee wrote extensively about the language translations, the texts. He wrote in his diary about these spiritual communications. So he had the major writing on the subject, whereas Kelley sort of didn't really write much about it at all. He was more focused on the alchemical aspects of it all. The most well-known, hiya Dolores, facet of the Enochian tablets are the 48 keys, if you like. They're the calls, and they're calls. They're actually called calls. They're used as an evo or invocation, so we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Essentially, you are talking the word magic. We aren't talking about religion. We aren't talking about spirituality per se. We are talking about magic. Dee believed that these 48 keys corresponded to the 49 magic lowercase, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, and that these could be used to open the 49 gates of wisdom and understanding. And that's the nutshell of the whole thing. John Dee, this is a quote from his diaries. He wrote extensively, so we haven't got a lot of excuse for not really knowing what was going on. He wrote, "I am therefore to instruct and inform you, according to your doctrine delivered, which is contained in the 49 tables in 49 voices or callings, which are the natural keys to open those, not 49, but 48, for one is not to be opened. These gates of understanding whereby you shall have knowledge to move every gate." Now, if we want to think of this as not necessarily having influence, then we only need to look at the fact that we use the term gateways regularly to refer to knowledge and understanding, and that we, have a tendency to get caught up in the idea that we need to open the next step and open the next step. And we're seeing a bit of an origin here. There's no doubt that it has an influence because, of course, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. This is John Dee, by the way, this image, and this next image is, in fact, Edward Kelley. Edward Kelley, who there is a bit of mystery around. John Dee, not so much. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn associated the Enochian keys with the tablets and lesser angels. So it's quite an interesting thing. The whole magic formation of the Golden Dawn was actually around these Enochian tablets. The Western magical tradition that it influenced, that was popularized by the Golden Dawn, was taken up and held in mantle by Aleister Crowley, who probably more than anything, because the Golden Dawn secretized it. They made it an elite understanding that you had to go through all of these initiations to learn it and understand it, whereas Aleister Crowley published them, which is what started this grand court battle between Aleister Crowley and Mathers, who was at the time in charge. And of course, I've got my theories on the ancient what we would call them secret societies, and you might want to go and have a look at some of those. But Golden Dawn is in there, and their legendary falling out with some very big names after they put them in there. It seems to imply to me that it was either just a colossal battle of wills in a continued and ongoing way, or that the Golden Dawn is making changes, which we do see. We see it in religion as well. You'll get a group that will take the original and they'll make it change to suit their own belief, their own agenda, to make it work for them. And then that's how the origins get lost. And there's a big question in there. Is it worth making a change and losing the origin, or is it worth keeping both of those in play so that you can decide for yourself whether this more modern version of something reflects the intention of the origin, or does it, in the case of magic, does change actually deflect and reduce its efficacy if you believe in magic? The influence is profound. There are now 2 published Enochian dictionaries, by the way. I don't know what to make of them. I haven't really looked at them. Numerous books on Enochian magic, a fair whack of them are just sort of made up brouhaha, representing various schools of thought and with regards to implementing the Enochian system. So there's a whole lot of material out there that isn't actually from John Dee. Now, when you read John Dee and when you read Kelley, which you can, I find it incredible. absolutely incredible. And when you do that, you do realize that as you continue to read it all, I don't think that they resolved the magic. They brought it through for sure. They brought the tables through for sure. There are instructions with them for sure. But there's no real indication that they mastered anything out of it, which isn't necessarily an unusual thing. So as we go through and we understand that, it left it sort of like an open ball, that instead of exploring it in its entirety and understanding it, people were changing it, and they have. There's a whole lot of tables out there. I've only ever bothered with the originals. I don't see the point in starting off with something that might be incorrect. If you're going to play with this stuff, get the right thing, right? And then work it out from there. If somebody simplified it or adjusted it to suit their own understanding, then we aren't necessarily talking an angelic energy anymore, or even a super intelligence anymore. We are now talking about an agendized something that this person can explain because they created it essentially from the original. It's simply like, if you like, the interpretation of the tarot. It doesn't matter how you interpret the tarot. You can look at it in a lot of different ways. But if you're going to use the word tarot, and if you're going to use the imagery of the tarot, you better understand the symbology of the tarot. Otherwise, you're now not actually doing that. You are doing something else. And that's where this whole birth of oracle cards really came from. Now we've got various types of tarot. We've got cat people tarot, and so the tarot itself as a word becomes a little bit bastardized, and it's used more of a way to describe similarity. That is, as soon as you see the word tarot, you know it's got 78 cards, for example, or it jolly well should have. You know that a lot of these decks will have their interpretation aligned with an original tarot deck, you know, so that people reading them can understand them, because people are not getting the symbols out of those cards. They're not getting the psychological tweaking that a tarot is designed to do. Same with the Reikis as well. Oh, exactly. It's quite interesting with the word Reiki, though, because when a person, and this is particular to America, by the way, it's not so much you'll see it here, although there's a bit of it. We have so many healing modalities in New Zealand that nobody really cares what name you use. They just want it to work. And there's an understanding that when I was learning, which is a long time ago now, 20 odd years ago, when I went through what was laughingly called training, that the Reiki master teacher that I had been in the industry for 30 years, and she had attuned to Satium, which is what I learnt from her. And she'd gone on to do Debbie Phoenix Dubrow, is it Debbie? Phoenix Dubrow's system of EMF healing, and I think it's not called EMF. Or is it called? Yes, electromagnetic field healing. She'd gone on to that, and I can remember after she'd taken $1,000 off me, her saying, I don't practice either Satium or Reiki anymore. We heal into the future. I do something completely different. I can remember my mind just going blank for a second as I thought, what the hell, man? You've just taken all this money off me to tell me that it's pretty much irrelevant because there's other ways of doing that. I also went on and learnt Reiki with another teacher who didn't really understand energy at all, sadly, but it was true. And then didn't understand the human energy field. None of them knew anything about the body and body healing, which, of course, what the hell is going on here? So when we look at these things, we've got to then start going back to what was lost between the origin and creation and development and the understanding of that, and what develops the understanding of that. And for me, in healing anyway, it's the vibrational expansion. It is to say there's no single frequency. There's no universal frequency either. There is a lot of frequency within the universe. There are a lot of vibrations, and then they are grouped. Your kidney is a group of thousands, if not millions, of frequencies that are available to you. Your liver is a completely different group. Your bones, your skin, we have all of this within one body. Forget about the universe. And so when we can align rather than attune, then we can get groups of frequencies together that are more like a cable going than it is like that would sound even sillier if you can't see my face making that sound effect, everybody. and even more effective than a single frequency that you may already be using, you know. So it's what is missing in the pattern, and I see that as a pattern along the similar lines of a barcode, where you have these different variations of light grouped and separate in such a way that you have an inexhaustible supply of potential. And of course, if we're not working with potential, we're not working. We're only in the past if we're not working with potential. Back to Dr. John D. Thanks for getting me going, Dolores. Kaboom. So who is Dr. D? Let's get there. What the heck is he? How did he manage to influence the ideology of modern Western spiritual questers? How did he do that? So we'll pop back to him and have a look at him. He doesn't look like the type of guy who'd be kind of new agey, right, and flunky and flaky. He looks like the intellectual he was. He looks like a successful, powerful, Elizabethan man. In 1581, he joined with Edward Kelley and claimed to have received communications from angels. Now, this is powerful stuff. You're talking at a time where the Spanish Inquisition was in play. You're talking a time when your religious beliefs were dictating your alliance in politics to your king, your queen, in his case, Elizabeth, who was Anglican. So because of the King Henry stance, which took England into the Church of England stance, there was a loosening up of everything. I don't believe that people like John Dee or Edward Kelley could have survived if there had not been the intervention on the part of King Henry VIII. I think that is the most profound spiritual intervention in history. He opened the world up, to multiple religions, because even though they made it the official belief of England, it was certainly not the only belief of England. We still had Protestants, we still had Catholics, and so England was quite possibly one of the first multi-religious states after Catholicism took a stranglehold over most of the world, which they did, That's why they had inquisitions, and the Spanish were so powerful and so Orthodox Catholic that they were taking that everywhere they went and crunching lesser populations, lesser, less aggressive populations under the weight of their physical prowess as well as their religious domination. So he was getting these messages from the other side via Kelley. Kelley was the seer. Dr. D was the writer, and this angelic language contained its own alphabet, grammar, and syntax, which they wrote down in journals. And those journals, you can go have a look at them today. The new language was called Enochian, it says here, but it wasn't really. So I didn't find the word Enochian anywhere, but that doesn't mean I saw everything, because you can't. It comes from John Dee's assertion that the biblical patriarch Enoch had been the last human to know the language, but he always referred to it as an angelic language, not as an Enochian language. But he does make that reference, which is two different things. He was born in 1527 and was a well-known occultist, mathematician, astronomer, and astrologer. He lived in West London most of his life. He was an educated man who studied at St. John's College in Cambridge. Big deal. These aren't superstitious minions, He was eventually accepted into the influential circles of the ruling elite, which is absolutely true. You couldn't get closer than he did, because he acted as the scientific advisor and confidant to Queen Elizabeth I. She was known to be an incredibly intelligent and incredibly non-superstitious woman. So we're looking here at the things that people believed in, that people still not necessarily believed in, but hold sway, hold power, that people to this day still hold sway and hold power. But by being aligned with the Queen, he was a powerful man. He's associated with coining the phrase, the British Empire. And during the early part of his life, he had little interest in the supernatural, but it was later on he became disillusioned with science alone and began experimenting with the occult, looking for the answers that the science of the day could not give him. And that's a seeking mind, that's an open mind. Later on, he was looking to discover lost spiritual knowledge. He became an expert in antiquities, I suppose, and recover the wisdom that he believed was hidden in these books. So he was very well read. He would have known about a lot of the scripts and texts that were found later when we say they were lost, we don't know when they were lost. So there were inklings and stories about these books. There were fables through word of mouth that these wonderful documents existed somewhere. And of course, with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Enochian texts were found, the Book of Giants in particular, which I did the show on last week, and they were all found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the thing was that there was rumor, and of course the Bible itself mentioned Enoch, and that his magic, that is years of living, and that had tantalized people for hundreds of years before even the Enoch was found, the Book of Enoch was found. But it was fabled, it was there, which he conceived as a book describing the magic system used by the patriarch as an Enoch of the Bible. Now, that tells you too that in his time they considered that Enoch was the original author, that he wrote Genesis, that he was the man. And to this day, there are many scholars who actually believe that also. Edward Kelley, let's have a look at Edward. Now, again, he doesn't look like the kind of guy you'd think running around vaping and, calling in spirits. He looks fairly, down to earth and fairly scholarly himself. He was known spirit medium and alchemist who made claim to being able to turn base metals into gold, even presenting a red powder and demonstrating this on a number of occasions, including in Bohemia, where he and Dee lived for many years. Please note that the Devil's Bible also hails from this area, although a few hundred years prior. So the Devil's Bible, which that actually was last week's show, sorry. The Enochian, Enoch was the one before. The Devil's Bible, in there are the same area where although it doesn't relate to alchemy as such, there are spells in there. There are invocations. So there's an interesting thing going on around Czechoslovakia at the time, and of course it's why we reference Bohemian for people that are different, that dress different, that are more interested in spiritual matters and art and culture than they are in material matters. Pretty interesting stuff that they all sort of link up when you start looking at it. It's a very small world. It seems that his sole value to Dee was the fact that he had the ability to understand and scribe or describe the angelic language. Dee's son Arthur mentions tensions between the two families as they travelled together. He wrote this in his own memoirs. However, like all muse-style or complementary relationships, tension is often a catalyst in my mind for amazing things. And I say that because it's that rubbing, isn't it? It's that tension, friction. Friction may be a better word, that draws something out of each party. Some of the best relationships aren't about fighting and arguments, but they are about drawing the best out of the other person. Here we have a spiritualist, medium, and we have a scientist. There is no doubt that their communications and conversations would be a little bit interesting. I'm certain as a scientist, Dee would find it hard to understand a certain amount of where Kelley's coming from and vice versa, and yet they share an interest, and it's that small area of their lives that matters, because Kelley seemed to be more interested actually in alchemy than the angelic medium spiritual side of things, but of course that's what you needed both of those together to understand what was going on, I guess, but there's undertones of alchemy all through this. It's one of those things too that they were probably, because they were both quite powerful men by the time they met, and I would say ego would play a fair role in where they are. But like a band of music, it's that combination, isn't it? It is those differences that rub out and bring forward the best of both. It can bestow some amazing information. Kelley did believe the angels were trying to reestablish the true art of magic. He wrote about that, which they said, that's him and Dee, the angels, said, would bequeath superhuman powers upon its practitioner. Kelley had a bit of an issue because, he was making claims of being able to turn powder into gold. So he attracted the attention of King Rudolph of Czechoslovakia, of Germany, King Rudolph II, and was instrumental. King Rudolph was instrumental in his climb to fame, really. He knighted him, which made him Sir Edward Kelley, and bestowed large wealth and estates. But it's to be noted that a lot of the articles suggest that this came from, Rudolph wanting to be rich and wanting to use wanting to use Kelley's alchemy of making metal into gold, and that may have been in there, but actually Kelley was married to a member of the household, a niece, I think it was, of Rudolph. So, there were familial ties in there as well. But things did go wrong. The king actually threw Kelley in jail. Now, again, some articles say he was a con man and thrown in jail. He was a con man. So biased. There are articles that annoy me because they're not factual and they're trying to disparage something. I don't see the point. Be factual or go away. If you want to disparage something, get your facts, then disparage it. Feel free. But he was thrown in jail because he killed a man called I don't even know how to say this. Yuri Yonkla in a duel. And the king threw him in jail for that. It was not allowed to be done. And he may have struck a deal with him with the gold. Now, this is a bit nobody really knows because he was given his freedom, but then he was imprisoned again when he failed to produce gold. He ended up dying in prison after failed attempt to get him released. He died due to injuries of trying to escape. So it tells you the kind of man he was. He's kind of grunty, right? He was kind of into it. And I'm not sure if his attempt to escape was something like, I'll bring some magic about and I'll fly out of here, and it didn't go well. I have no idea. There is no real information around that. But he was writing letters to some powerful people, and they were writing letters to him while he was in jail, and those are recorded from their memoirs, or the letters were found, whichever way you want to go. The Lord Treasurer, while he was in jail, so we're getting towards the end of his life. Before he was in jail, the Lord Treasurer for Elizabeth, Sir William Cecil, I should say, wrote lots of letters to Kelley imploring him to return to England. He truly believed that Kelley was the answer to England's financial woes, If he had but gone, Kelley would not have met the fate he did in Bohemia. Having said that, his wife and his family and his children were now in their home territory, if you like. So Dee and Kelley began performing anyway at some point. Dee and Kelley started to perform a series of magical events, is the best way we've got it. Dee wrote in his personal journey that God had sent good angels to communicate directly with mankind. And from about I went the wrong way there. Sorry about that, Chiefs. From about 1580, he was collaborating with fellow occultists and seer, not too far ahead, and seer Edward to communicate with these angels. And hundreds of spirit conversations were recorded, including that what they claimed was an angelic language called, today it's known as Enochian, but this alphabet was revealed to John Dee and Edward Kelley during scrying sessions. And when various texts and tables were received from the angels, John and Edward used a black mirror made of Aztec obsidian to achieve this. And that's what this is here that you're looking at. All of these items are in the British Museum, and they are John Dee's collection of scrying materials. Now, this here is what's written on the back of the obsidian mirror, which is quite fascinating little story in itself, and we will get there because the stone is one of what they say is many, I don't know what that means, many, hundreds or lots, what they call cult objects by the museum that were brought to Europe after the conquest of Mexico by Cortez between 1527 and 1530. So about 50 years prior. How John Dee got a hold of them, nobody knows, but he didn't get a hold of them without having a definite bent, right, in this area. He was seeking these items out. So he was already having some kind of experiences himself. He had to already be receiving information, but maybe his skills weren't as good as he would like. From the left, you have this next one I think gives me, from the left, you have the Sigillum de Hermes, crystal ball over here, right, and a gold disc engraved with a representation of the vision of the four castles seen during a session at Krakow in 1584. You can actually go and find a PDF with they're very short chapters. When I say books, these are very short. These guys had to handwrite all of this stuff, so we aren't talking tomes exactly, so they're quite easy to read. during a session at Krakow, and one of the PDFs, one of the chapters, might be chapter 5, is it's called Krakow in 1584, and Deed's obsidian, and he called it a shoe stone. That's this black thing down here, or magic mirror, through which Edward Kelley scribed the main body of the angelic information. So it's quite a fascinating little thing that they've got going on there. That if you can look at some very close-up pictures of that obsidian mirror, it's quite beautiful, actually. The very fact that the angelic material, the language, the tablets all found their way to the modern public is in itself perhaps the impetus of the angels, if you want to go there, to ensure it's not lost, because many sources recount the story of how Robert and Susanna Jones in 1642 bought an old chest that had once belonged to Thomas Woodall, and they took the chest home where it sat for 20 years. Now, I'm curious as to why you would buy a chest, unless they bought it just to look at the whole chest itself, but I personally would want to open it up. That's me. It sat there for 20 years until, for whatever reason, Robert Jones decided to investigate, stuck a knife into a small slit, and found he'd opened a secret drawer in the chest. By the time these manuscripts surfaced in the later 1600s, Dee and Kelley's manuscripts were known already to a man called Ashmole. He was a well-known antiquarian, and it's interesting for us to note this, because again, it's who gets told, who hears about it, that determines that we know about it today. If Ashmole hadn't been who he was, it could have found its way into the burning fires. You know, you just don't know. If it was a religious person, you just don't know what could have happened to it. But Ashmole, and again, like I said, people hear of these documents, there's rumors of them going around, and then suddenly he finds himself with the actual documents. He must have thought it was Christmas. The whole colourful history of these documents, these had been dug up in 1610 or 10s or 20s in what had been Dee's yard, that some other documents, and that's what Ashmole had already in his possession. And then there was this other antiquarian. His name was Robert Cotton, who's very famous as the collector who saved the original manuscript for Beowulf, by the way, just as an aside. Inside, among other things, he found much of the work of the so-called, I've got to stop saying so-called, of the Enochian corpus, the 48 angelic keys, the angelic diaries, the tables, word squares, weird letters. Apparently, the maid, note here, the time-honoured device of blaming the help, had thought the papers were useless and lined a few pie pans with some of them, cooking away nearly half the collection. Then, for some reason, the Joneses put the stack of mysterious papers back into the chest, forgot about them again, and when Mr. Jones conveniently died, not long after, the Great Fire of London broke out. So, to quote one retelling, the widow Jones gathered as many possessions as she could carry, but the chest was too heavy to move. However, as the flames started to lick Lombard Street, Mrs. Jones decided to remove the mysterious papers from the chest and take them with her. She remarried a man named Wales, who showed them to the astrologer William Lilly, very famous man, who suggested sending them to Elias Ashmole, and that's how they got into Ashmole's possession, which he did, and the rest, so they say, is history. Quite a fascinating thing. It was truly not until the 70s that the more scholarly approach was brought to bear on Dee and Kelley's work, even though for a few centuries, right into the modern era, there were sects and groups practicing Enochian magic, like the Golden Dawn, possibly the Knights Templar. There's certainly some magical something in there, and definitely the likes of Aleister Crowley. They believed totally the magical potential of the tablets and saw that all one needed was the ability to use them, not necessarily decipher them. And so I find that a little bit interesting too. It seems to me that maybe the idea is to have an instinctual approach, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when I show you the tablets themselves. But Aleister did write the Liber Chinoch, which he released in 1912, a representation of the universe derived by John Dee through the scrying of Edward Kelley. That's how he wrote it up and marketed it. This first became published commentary on the Enochian system, and Aleister had determined that this gets a bit hard after this, but he determined that he was Edward Kelley reincarnated or incarnated, and Crowley's oft-quoted and paraphrased definition of the magical evocation as called forth from within might be considered mathematically in terms of how one might see or hear what comes from higher dimensions. And in this, me and Aleister are in total agreement. I'm often talking about that. These comes from higher dimensions as evoked into a space that seems three-dimensional, that is really a projection of something higher. That is to say, we're projecting the information as opposed to receiving the information. It's already there. We're already a part of the larger whole, if you like. It gets all a bit subjective from there, so I'm not going to go in and on and on and on about it. But at the bottom end of the line, we are looking at something of quite a bit of interest when we start thinking about, there was even one scholarly article written that suggested that it was DNA information that these guys were drawing forth rather than angelic. And either way, if that's the case, that's phenomenal in itself, I believe anyway. Some Enochian magicians suggest that the first and second Enochian keys define the scope. This is kind of what we're looking at, when it comes to this sort of thing. Define the scope or context for remaining calls. They are called calls. For example, the first Enochian key appears to be related to the manifestations of spirit, while the second Enochian key, and please note the word appears, to outline a framework of which the powers of the Enochian system can be described and contained. You can't let magic loose without containing it. Additionally, it appears that the verses of the Enochian keys tells a creation story. The first key begins with God, while the 18th key details the establishment of God's power within the center of the earth. The interesting thing there, of course, is that the keys are considered, as Dee says himself, gateways to enlightenment. And in the East, with the Buddha, with Jesus, everybody is pushing humankind towards enlightenment. But what is enlightenment? It's a very simple thing. Enlightenment is understanding. When you understand something, then you are enlightened. Then, of course, you're enlightened in that area. There's always the next thing to understand. Now, this picture looks a little bit like one of those, word connect kind of a games, but it's really what you're talking about. It's commonly believed that modern magical practitioners and groups have projected their interpretation included more modern standards like the pentagram, for instance, which is, by the way, a very argumentative subject in certain circles, back onto the Enochian tablets. In other words, they're saying it was never used back then. There was the symbol that John Dee drew, interestingly enough, looks far more like a Merkaba star than it looks like a pentagram. And interestingly enough, when you look at this, it is almost exactly the symbol that I chose for my shop originally, for my business actually. I have a symbol that I saw, I drew through and represented, and here we have it pretty much in his works. Now, while I didn't know about that way back then, that brings us back to Carl Jung, that everything is in the ethers. We just pull it on out there. We don't actually create any of it. We are a part of something so much larger than ourselves. We can only represent a tiny part of what that is. We can only possibly represent a tiny part of what that is. That there's this whole thought when I look at these and when you see them yourselves, and for those listening on iTunes, I've got to remember them all. I should have a little list. Google Play, Spreaker, Kiwi 6, and of course, if you're listening on in Chewy Talks, you can pop along to the show page. That's energytherapies.intuitalks.com, and you can have a look at the archives where you can see. You'll see a list of the pictures to the left, and you can just click on the relevant pictures and hear what I'm saying about them as you look at them. But you will get a greater understanding. I've chosen not to use any reproductions, only the real McCoy, as it were, following the instructions. There were instructions on how to create the tablet, how to create the table, and that includes things like pictures and so on. But I can't help but see it all as a cipher. The tables are like a cipher, which echoes the work of the Bible code, which is why I've put this image here. The Bible code, the Hebrew, the original Bible code, known as Hatzofin Hatnachi. I hope I said that right, and I'm sure I didn't quite. Also known as the Torah code, is a purported set of secret messages encoded within the Hebrew text of the Torah. This hidden code has been described as a method by which specific letters from a text can be selected to reveal an otherwise obscured message. Essentially, it wasn't until we got computers that in 1997, Michael Drosnin broke the code using computers to the chagrin of Jewish scholars who had been at it for hundreds and thousands of years, believing very deeply that there was hidden messages in the Torah. And, of course, what he did there was a certain amount of letters would be found by the computer, and when it was found, they would go and space. So it's kind of random the way they did it. You could put, for example, they did this, you can find the book online if you wanted to. It's older now, but if you look up the Bible code by Michael Drosnin, you'll see that what they did was they put Jesus of Nazareth in there, and I thought, what would they have done if they just put Jesus? What would they have got out of there? Now, you could at that time and possibly now still find computerized programs, and as long as you can work out the right Hebrew lettering, this is the fall down. It doesn't work in English. It only works in the original Torah. So if you get the right letters for your name, for example, and you pop it in there, what it does is it starts searching. The computer starts searching this whole book, and it comes up with X amount of letters, and they must be spaced exactly the same number of characters apart. So, for example, if I put Dolores, I'll use you, Dolores. If I put Dolores in there, and you could use Dolores Smolak Alk Chiasin. I'm not sure if we say that right. Chiasin? I'm not sure how to say that. Chiasin? If you put your name in there, then the D, the O, the L, the O, R, E, S, and so on would all have to have the same amount of characters between them. So the computer would pick out the letters that you've put into it, and it would have to say have 5,000 characters between it. It would just go through and through and through that whole book. And then when you come back with something that's common sense. Now, if it doesn't make a sentence, and it should make a sentence, then what actually happens? So what happens then is once they find the Doris Small Chiasin and find that each letter is, say, 5,000 characters apart for the whole thing, then they've got it right, and then the search goes for every 5,000th character. Ba-boom, 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 and you should end up with a paragraph or a sentence or even a little bit more with something pertaining to you, something very specific. Fascinating stuff. Go read it, have a look at it. I was fascinated by it in the 90s when it came out, 1997, when it was brand new. I was hot for it, man. He put out a couple of books since then, and you can't help but think, well, geez, computers have come so far today that it's quite likely that you could really do this well now and do it quickly or fairly quickly and fairly easily. Back then, you were talking a fairly sophisticated computerized technology, probably no more than what we get in our average phone today. But the point is the same. The hidden code is within a larger structure. Because it's within a particular type of structure, it has X amount of potentials, right, based on what you put in there. Now, the future technologies, if understanding this, then maybe the Enochian tablets need computerized understanding, and I'm confused as to why nobody's done that yet. Nobody with the right skills, that is, why they haven't tried that yet. It makes me curious, because it makes sense to me that running through specific patterns would give you the answer. And we are looking at patterns. We are looking at platonic solids. As you draw them over the letters, the lines conform to letters, and that's what you're kind of looking at. But I'm not quite sure how you make magic out of that, so we would have to find out. Perhaps if you have a sacred geometry, because it is sacred geometry we're talking about, and you run that geometry over the any part, if not all of the chart, you could end up with a chant or an invocation, take your pick. Pretty interesting stuff. Because we have the Bible written well before we barely had a pen, I would say there's nothing to say that we couldn't have that same principle applied to something that's 500 years old. The the Great Table is what it's known as. This is it here. This is the Great Table. You want to make that big, make it big. You can go in there and you can expand the size of that whole picture. I'll expand the size and you can see the letters. This is created with by Teresa Burns and J. Allen Moore, and I will tell you they have done so by following the instructions exactly as it's put in the book. So this is probably as close as you're going to get to it if you don't read the book yourself and follow the instructions yourself. Really quite fascinating, isn't it? Now, these symbols, if you're looking at these letters, are not random. They have got the original symbols that were put out there, if you like, which is the language, the angelic language. Now, to understand that, I'll just show you. There's the language right there. And that's been translated by John Dee and by Edward Kelley. And that's exactly what it looks like. Some of those symbols are very clearly recognizable, by the way. Some of them not so much. And when they are reversed, interestingly enough, there are some interesting things that happen, which another author sort of pulled upon. But there we go. Now, if you have a look at the symbol here, we've got a symbol in modern times called a healing symbol called angel wings, which is just about exactly that. Clearly, that looks like Omega, but all the rest I really couldn't give you. We've got almost an Om here, but not quite. Quite interesting. Having said that, scholars did look at it in the 70s, which I mentioned, and came up that there was no prior origin, even though there were a couple of similarities with language being what it would be. There's unlikely in a scholar's mind that there wouldn't be at least a couple of similarities. But what they are suggesting is that how many similarities makes the difference if there are things that are just a bit too close. And they came up clear. So we're saying this is new. New characters, there's new everything about it, and there we go. According to Jewish scholars, there's an incredible similarity if you're using a compilation of letters to make words that can then be placed into a cohesive sentence, although the tablets are not actually trying to do that. They're not even trying to see into the future as such. They are a form of magical equations, and so it's quite noticeable that there is a similarity to something that may be alchemical, bearing in mind it was born through by Edward Kelley. If we go on to Ave, now Ave, according to Ave was the angel, the main angel that was talking to Edward Kelley, or channeled by Edward Kelley. There were, according to Ave, 91 angelic governors, and with this was scribed, the names of which were scribed over 2 days, and they were given the names of 91 provinces of the world that these angels were to govern. These are the building blocks for the 4 watchtowers. John Dee referred to these as a secret control language of celestial mechanics. One of the overwhelming truths about this angelic language is that it has been proven to be entirely new, so we can't ignore that. The scholarly interest was, in fact, to determine whether this was simply a construct based on what man already knows and uses, and while there has been found a bit of influences following the introduction of the angelic language, there was found to be nothing that influenced it prior to its inception. So completely new and unheard of language is a rare thing indeed. Before anyone dismisses this out of hand, we must acknowledge that the finding and sharing of the new is not unheard of in scholarly circles, not just spiritual ones. Perhaps the same channeled information came to hand today. If it came to hand today, it would be a different story and outcome. I'm reminded of Ramanujan, I think that's how you say it, Ramanujan, a mathematical genius who filled notebooks with pages of mathematical formulas and relationships whispered to him. That's the formulas and the relationships of the formulas, whispered to him by the goddess Namagiri. Even today, high-tech mathematicians aided by supercomputers still can't solve many of his theories. It's a fascinating thing. If you think of what we think of as beautiful minds, and we look at these individuals in our world who can process information and not understand any of it, they just churning it out, they are getting it from somewhere, right? And so does it matter whether we say that's angelic? Does it matter if they know or don't know? I think we are kind of compelled, even today, to say this information came from there. Now, if it's a song or if it's a painting, people are quite happy to say that it came from within you. When it becomes something fairly sophisticated and we're looking for somebody to believe or orient themselves towards this information, then suddenly we're in a position where others pressure us into qualifying or validating through some other means. Depending on the time that you are bringing this information through, would actually dictate how you were to present that. At an earlier time, you would have to say God or die, right? It's a God or the devil. You're done, you know. So if you want to bring something through, you need to choose a side. You need to choose a space and a place that is accepted by your recipients. There's also, even more recently, the economist Nobel Prize winner John Nash, who I love to bits, who was famously asked, this was like blah, 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 it's like a trumpet going off. How could you, a mathematician, believe that extraterrestrials were sending you messages? To which he answered, because the ideas I had about supernatural beings came to me the same way my mathematical ideas did, so I took them seriously. What a beautiful answer, right? We can't get past that. And this is a depiction, John Dee's depiction of the watchtowers, by the way. They were a dream by Kelley and channeled directly, transcribes these watchtowers as the grid with which they contain, containeth all human knowledge out of springeth physic. He acknowledged the elemental creatures among you. This is a direct quote, by the way. How many kinds there are and for what use they were created. Those that live by air by themselves, those that live by waters by themselves, those that live in the earth by themselves. The property of fire, which is in secret, life of all things, which incredibly is rather coming to light with regards to the sun. And in just the last year, it's been put forward that the sun is not burning gases necessarily, but burning electricity from somewhere in its core. It has an electrical origin. The knowledge, finding, and use of metals and virtues of them, the conjurations, virtues of stones, they are all of one matter. The conjoining of and knitting together of natures, the destination of nature and of things that may perish, moving from place to place, as in from country to country at pleasure, the knowledge of all crafts mechanical, transmutation formulas, said non-essentials, which means formal alchemical transmutation. This is written in Dee's book, and he notes in the margin, the 9th chapter may be added, and is of the secrets of men, knowing wherefore there is a particular table. After this, Ave disappears for a moment when Dee records the great angel reappearing with 3 others. So there we go. I'll leave that there because we'll get back to the great table. We're running out of time. And this is the 4 watchtowers, how he drew it, how it looks. We can have a close-up look at that. We won't understand too much of it because it's all over the place. But there we go. There's the terminology. It's written in Latin. The whole thing was written in Latin, which is why you must have a translation. But wow, this is his depiction as it was described to him and seen by Kelley. The 4 gateways. Quite a fascinating area indeed. I've lost something. Hang on a minute. You know what I've lost? Oh, there it is. No, I haven't lost a thing. I showed it to you before. So there's the tables. Now, I've no way managed to put myself in a position where I'm going to have the time to actually talk about the Enochian magic. And I've had a few shows where I've touched on magic. So it's been a very important thought to me as I was getting all of this knowledge, as this show is about the documents that were brought forward and how they've influenced us, and they've influenced us clearly through the Golden Dawn. The Hermetic Society to this day is practicing and teaching Enochian magic. There's Enochian Magic 101 all over the place, and how to create your table and so forth and so forth. So I have decided today that my next series is going to be called Magic Through the Ages, and I will start exploring with earnest how to employ, how to deploy these different types of, it's mind-boggling. It's huge. There's no way an hour can get through it, but I really don't want to go to 2-hour shows. But I think it'll be nice to separate these two out too, and so we can direct you back to the show before I do the other one if you need a refresher in it. But having this basic understanding of how they come about, what they are, you can even go to Wikimedia and you can find Wikipedia and find the 91 angels. There's a whole, but all of the information is everywhere. I do have John D. and Kelley's books, which I have read mostly, but of course, I will go through them for the more angelical aspects. And the one book that I haven't really read properly would be John Dee's journal, his actual diaries, which have him and his spirit. It's actually him and spirituality, him and the spirit. Quite a fascinating thing. So, because of that, we're going to be having a look at the Magic of the Ages as our next series coming forward, but I've got 4 more of these to go, which means next week we are looking at the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is fantastic, everybody. This is one of my favorites, that and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I love the fact that there was this much attention paid to developing your own self afterlife. I think it fascinates me that amount of energy was put into it. The Egyptian Book of the Dead is essentially a collection of spells which enable the soul of the deceased to navigate the afterlife. The famous title was given to this work by Western scholars because the actual title would translate as, are you ready? It's pretty long. The Book of Coming Forth by Day, or Spells for Going Forth by Day. So there we go. And then on a psychic affair this week, we're doing hand readings. I did mention that was supposed to be last week's show, but then I'm doing the monthly influences at the beginning of the month from now on. But send photos to me on Facebook, on Chewy Talks, or at dorothy@energytherapies.co. Send me photos of your left or your right or both. I don't care. I'm not reading your palms. I just want the whole hand. I need it down to the wrist, and I will do your reading on air next week, but I do need that photo to do so. Now, if you do not send me a photo and you forget and you want to be into it, make sure it's ready, and then we can get you to put it up on the show day, but you will have to do that. I won't be running around looking for it. Also, to be noted, I am guesting on a fireside chat with Mama D tomorrow evening on Paramania Radio about 8 p.m., I do believe, for a couple of hours. So we will see you then. And remember this week, don't be a part of your own problem. Ciao for now.
Are you looking for a place to meet like-minded people? Perhaps you're a light worker looking for a safe place to share your thoughts and services. We've got a place for you. Intuitalks.com. Join for free, post updates, blogs, create and join groups via website or radio or class package. The possibilities are endless. Join the all-spiritual, all-under-one-roof network, www.intuitalks.com.